Ethan Caldwell stepped into his sprawling corner office on the top floor of Caldwell Enterprises, a towering financial powerhouse in New York City. He had always prided himself on running a company built on integrity, ambition, and opportunity. Yet today, an unsettling weight settled in his chest as he stared at the thick report on his desk, a report that contradicted everything he believed about his own company. The internal employee satisfaction survey revealed a stark decline in morale. Words like exploitation, favoritism, and toxic culture jumped off the pages. Employees felt undervalued, overworked, and unheard. Promotions were reportedly handed out based on personal relationships rather than merit, and long-standing employees had been overlooked for career growth, while others, with the right connections, ascended effortlessly. Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration simmering beneath his normally composed exterior. How had things come to this? He had built Caldwell Enterprises from the ground up, ensuring that every department functioned efficiently, every employee was treated with fairness. Or so he thought. Determined to get to the bottom of this, he pressed the intercom on his sleek mahogany desk. "Get me Linda Thompson. Now." Moments later, Linda Thompson, the head of operations, waltzed in, her usual air of confidence radiating from her. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer, she smiled as though she had no idea why she had been summoned. Ethan didn't waste time on pleasantries. He tossed the report across his desk. "Have you read this?" Linda barely glanced at the pages before shrugging. "Yes, sir. It's just another survey. Employees always have grievances. It's impossible to please everyone." Ethan's eyes darkened. "They're not just grievances. It's a pattern. One I don't like. The numbers don't lie, Linda. Employees feel exploited. They feel unheard. Do you have any explanation for this?" Linda chuckled, a condescending sound that made Ethan's fist clench under the desk. "Mr. Caldwell, we're a financial firm. This industry is tough. If some employees feel they're not getting enough recognition, maybe they're just not working hard enough." The casual dismissal ignited something deep inside Ethan. Was this truly how his management team viewed the people keeping his company running? He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I need to see what's happening in my company, and I need to see it with my own eyes." Linda shifted uncomfortably. "I can arrange for a few employee meetings." Ethan shook his head. "No need. I'll handle it myself." After Linda left, Ethan called Marcus Hill, the head of human resources. Marcus, a longtime friend, and one of the few people Ethan trusted implicitly, entered the office with a concerned expression. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, glancing at the open report on Ethan's desk. Ethan folded his arms. "I need to see what's really happening in my company. I want to go undercover." Marcus's brows shot up. "You want to what?" "I need you to set me up with a position where no one will recognize me. Somewhere people feel comfortable talking without worrying about my status." Marcus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You want to go in as a regular employee? Do you even know what that entails?" Ethan leaned forward. "I'll be a janitor." Marcus blinked. "You're joking." "Dead serious." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Nobody questions a janitor. They're invisible to most people in an office. If there's corruption, favoritism, or unfair treatment, I'll see it firsthand." Marcus hesitated before finally nodding. "All right, I'll make the arrangements. But this is insane." Ethan smirked. "Maybe, but if my company is rotting from the inside, I need to be the first to know." The next morning, Ethan Caldwell ceased to exist, at least within the walls of his own company. Dressed in a worn-out blue uniform, a baseball cap pulled low over his face, he became Eric Miller, the newest janitor at Caldwell Enterprises. As he pushed a cleaning cart through the sleek, glass-paneled hallways of his own empire, he had no idea that within a week, everything he thought he knew about his company and himself would change forever. The morning air was crisp as Ethan Caldwell, now Eric Miller, the janitor, stepped into Caldwell Enterprises from the employee entrance. Unlike the grand glass doors that he was accustomed to walking through as CEO, this entrance was tucked in the back of the building, used only by maintenance staff, delivery workers, and other personnel who remained largely invisible to corporate leadership. The uniform was stiff and unfamiliar, his janitor ID clipped to his shirt. A plain baseball cap cast a shadow over his face, concealing the sharp, authoritative presence he usually carried. Today, he wasn't Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO. Today, he was just another worker. Ethan glanced around the underground break room, a small, dimly lit space with mismatched chairs and a vending machine that hummed loudly in the corner. A few employees sat sipping coffee, their voices low, their postures slumped with exhaustion. "Hey, new guy," a gruff voice called out, snapping Ethan's attention. A stocky man in his late 50s with graying hair and tired eyes approached him. His uniform bore the name tag Mike, and he exuded the weariness of someone who had spent decades in a thankless job. "You must be the new janitor. I'm Mike, the guy who's going to show you the ropes." He extended a calloused hand, which Ethan shook firmly. "Eric, nice to meet you," Ethan replied, keeping his voice casual. Mike grunted and handed Ethan a mop and a spray bottle filled with disinfectant. "Don't expect much. You clean. You keep your head down. Nobody cares about the janitors." Ethan took in the words, his mind already racing. Nobody cares about the janitors. That alone spoke volumes about the company's culture. Mike gestured toward a long hallway. "Come on, rookie, let's get to work." Ethan followed Mike through the bustling floors of Caldwell Enterprises, pushing a cleaning cart past employees who barely acknowledged his presence. "You see that?" Mike muttered under his breath as they passed a group of executives laughing loudly near the coffee station. "They don't even see us. We're invisible. But if something's out of place, if the trash isn't emptied or the floors aren't spotless, they sure as hell notice then." Ethan nodded silently, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Employees moved about their day, but the division between corporate elites and the lower-tier workers was painfully obvious. No one greeted the janitorial staff. No one exchanged pleasantries. The air was filled with an unspoken hierarchy. As they made their rounds, Ethan overheard conversations that he would have never been privy to in his executive role. Two junior accountants whispered about a denied promotion that had been promised to them. A group of IT specialists groaned about being overworked without recognition. A receptionist complained to her coworker that management only cared about results, not people. Ethan clenched his jaw. So it was true. The company he thought was thriving had cracks running deep within its foundation. Later that day, Mike led him to the executive floor, where Ethan once ruled. Now, in a janitor's uniform, he was just another shadow passing through. As he wiped down a sleek conference table, he saw Linda Thompson walk by, laughing with a group of executives. Her demeanor was one of power, of confidence. She exuded authority, and yet the employees below her feared and resented her. Ethan realized something chilling. Leadership didn't fear losing good employees because they assumed workers were replaceable, and that was a problem. As the day ended, Ethan slumped into a chair in the janitor's break room, exhausted in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had spent just one day in this world, and already his perspective was shifting. He had only scratched the surface, but one thing was clear. His company was nothing like what he had envisioned, and if he wanted to fix it, he needed to go even deeper. The second day of Ethan's undercover mission began much like the first. Early morning, stiff uniform, and the quiet hum of Caldwell Enterprises' towering offices awakening for another business day. But this time, he wasn't just observing. He was listening, absorbing, and experiencing firsthand what it meant to be at the bottom of the corporate food chain. Mike greeted him with a nod, handing him a clipboard with the day's cleaning schedule. "We've got a long one today, rookie. Executive floor in the morning, common areas in the afternoon." Ethan took the clipboard, his gaze scanning the list. Every floor, every break room, every restroom was accounted for. There was no corner of the building that he wouldn't touch, no space too insignificant for him to clean, and yet no one would notice him. As he began his rounds, Ethan overheard snippets of conversations, grumblings about unfulfilled raises, employees venting about being passed over for promotions, murmurs of exhaustion and resignation. But it wasn't until he met Angela, a young accountant, that the reality of the corporate imbalance truly struck him. Angela sat hunched over her desk, stacks of files surrounding her like a fortress. Her red-rimmed eyes flickered between her computer screen and the documents, her fingers flying over the keyboard at an impossible speed. Ethan, pushing his cleaning cart nearby, watched as she sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. Then, Linda Thompson's voice cut through the air like a blade. Angela, I need that report finalized by noon, and I don't want excuses. Angela flinched, straightening her posture immediately. Yes, Miss Thompson. Linda barely acknowledged her before striding away, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Ethan saw the moment Angela deflated, her shoulders sagging, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk as if she needed to physically hold herself together. He couldn't stay silent, not after what he had just witnessed. He casually approached, pretending to empty the nearby trash bin. Rough day? Angela gave him a tired, half-hearted smile. Aren't they all? Ethan leaned on his cart, keeping his voice light. That looked brutal. Is it always like that? Angela hesitated, then let out a bitter chuckle. Worse, actually. But complaining won't change anything. I just keep my head down and do my job. That phrase again. Keep your head down. How many employees in his company felt this way? Later in the day, Ethan found himself in the IT department, where he met Henry, a mid-level IT specialist who seemed to be the only person in the entire office willing to lend a helping hand. Damn thing crashes every week, and they expect us to fix it in minutes, Henry muttered, typing furiously on his keyboard as he tried to restore the company's internal server. Ethan, mopping the floor nearby, watched as Henry worked tirelessly, troubleshooting the system while two frustrated managers stood over him, arms crossed. I need this working now, not later. Now. One of them snapped. Henry forced a polite nod. I'm doing everything I can, but without the right updates and permissions, these crashes will keep happening. I sent in a request last month. That's not my problem, Henry. Just get it done. The manager walked away without another word, leaving Henry shaking his head. Is it always like that? Ethan asked, feigning casual interest. Henry sighed, running a hand through his messy brown hair. Pretty much. I do the work, someone else takes the credit, and when things go wrong, guess who gets blamed? Ethan didn't have to guess. He already knew. By the time his shift ended, Ethan felt an unfamiliar exhaustion, not from the labor itself, but from what he had seen and heard. People weren't just overworked. They were invisible. Sitting in the janitor's break room that night, Ethan stared at the floor, deep in thought. He had walked these halls as a CEO for years, but it was only now as a janitor that he was truly seeing his company for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw. The third day of Ethan's undercover experience revealed something that struck him even harder than the exhaustion or the blatant disregard for lower-level employees, the stark divide between those at the top and those who kept the company running. He and Mike were assigned to clean the executive dining area that morning. It was a lavish private space exclusively for upper management, a stark contrast to the cramped, dimly lit break room where janitorial staff and entry-level employees gathered. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the scent of freshly brewed gourmet coffee filled the air. The mahogany dining tables gleamed under the morning sun, set with porcelain plates and silver utensils. As Ethan pushed his cart into the room, a group of executives laughed over breakfast. Among them was Linda Thompson, effortlessly holding court with her colleagues, sipping an expensive latte while discussing quarterly reports. Ethan wiped down a table nearby, pretending not to listen. The new analysts are struggling, one executive chuckled. Half of them will quit before the year ends. Survival of the fittest, right? Exactly, Linda said smoothly. If they can't keep up, they don't belong here. Simple as that. Ethan clenched his jaw, barely resisting the urge to respond. Was this really how leadership viewed their employees? He had once believed that hard work determined success at Caldwell Enterprises, but now, standing in the same room as his own executive team, he realized that many saw employees as expendable. Mike nudged him. Keep moving, rookie. If they see you staring, they'll complain, and it won't be them getting in trouble. It'll be us. Ethan reluctantly turned away, but the conversation echoed in his mind. If this was the leadership mentality, no wonder employees felt powerless. Later in the afternoon, Ethan returned to the general employee break room, a space far different from the lavish executive dining area. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the vending machine hummed loudly in the corner. Employees slumped in their chairs, scrolling through their phones, eating hastily between meetings. Angela sat at a table in the corner, rubbing her temples while staring at an untouched sandwich. Henry was at another table, typing on his laptop even during his break. Both of them looked drained. Ethan grabbed a rag and began cleaning nearby, subtly striking up a conversation. "Long day." Angela let out a tired chuckle. "That's an understatement. Linda just dumped another last-minute project on me. Apparently, if I want to be considered for promotion, I need to prove I can handle extra responsibility. But let's be honest, she's just offloading her work on me." Henry snorted. "Sounds about right. Same thing happened to me last year. I covered for my boss while he was on vacation. Then when promotion season came, he got a raise, and I got a thank you." Angela groaned. "I swear, sometimes I feel like no matter how hard I work, I'll always be stuck here." Ethan studied them both. These were the people who kept the company moving, yet leadership either ignored them or used them until they burned out. His grip tightened on the rag. Something had to change. As he finished his shift, Ethan realized he wasn't just seeing problems, he was living them. And if he didn't act soon, his company would rot from the inside out. It was time to do something about it. By the fourth day, Ethan felt the weight of what he had learned pressing down on him. The company he built was nothing like what he had envisioned. He had wanted Caldwell Enterprises to be a beacon of excellence, a place where employees were rewarded for their hard work. Instead, he was uncovering a toxic ecosystem where power protected itself, and those who truly kept the company afloat were overlooked, overworked, and forgotten. This realization hit him hardest when he arrived early to start his shift and found Angela asleep at her desk. A stack of spreadsheets was open in front of her, along with an empty coffee cup and a half-eaten protein bar. The dark circles under her eyes told a painful story. She had worked through the night. Ethan frowned. "Angela?" She stirred, blinking up at him, confusion flashing across her face before realization set in. "Oh, hey, Eric. Have you been here all night?" She groaned, stretching her arms. "Yeah. The financial reports were due, and Linda gave me extra work at the last minute. She said it needed to be perfect, or I'd risk losing favor with the executive team." Ethan's jaw tightened. Losing favor? What kind of leadership threatened employees like that? Angela attempted a weak smile. "It's fine. I'm used to it. Besides, I need this job. If that means sacrificing sleep, then so be it." Ethan's stomach churned. This wasn't fine. None of this was fine. Before he could say more, Linda Thompson strode into the room. She barely glanced at Angela, instead focusing on her phone. "Angela, I hope you finalize the numbers. I need them before lunch, and I don't want any mistakes." Angela straightened immediately. "Yes, Ms. Thompson." Linda didn't acknowledge her further, walking away as if Angela was no more significant than a piece of office furniture. Ethan gripped the mop handle so hard his knuckles turned white. This has to stop. Later that evening, Ethan found himself in the IT department, where Henry was battling yet another system failure. The network had crashed again, and management was furious. "You need to get this fixed now, Henry. This is unacceptable," a manager snapped, standing over him. Henry gritted his teeth. "I told you last month we needed a system upgrade. If you had approved it, this wouldn't be happening." The manager scoffed. "We don't have time for excuses. Just get it done." As the manager walked off, Henry slammed his hands on the desk. "Unbelievable. They refuse to listen to anything we say, but when things go wrong, we're the ones getting blamed." Ethan sighed, leaning on his cleaning cart. "Sounds familiar." Henry let out a bitter laugh. "Welcome to Caldwell Enterprises, where credit flows upward and blame rolls downhill." Ethan felt something snap inside him. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. He wasn't just undercover anymore. He was on a mission. Tomorrow, everything would change. Ethan barely slept that night. His mind replayed every moment from the past few days, Angela collapsing from exhaustion, Henry being ignored despite his expertise, the executives joking about overworked employees like it was a game. This wasn't just a flawed system, it was broken. And now Ethan had seen it with his own eyes. At dawn, he walked into Caldwell Enterprises, his janitor's uniform now feeling more like a badge of understanding than a disguise. Today, he wasn't just an observer, he was ready to take action. Mike greeted him with a grunt as they began their morning rounds. "You okay, rookie? You look like you didn't sleep." Ethan forced a half smile. "Guess I'm starting to see why people feel the way they do about this place." Mike scoffed. "Welcome to the bottom of the ladder, kid. Ain't so pretty from down here, is it?" Ethan didn't respond. Not yet. As he walked past Angela's desk, he saw her gulping down coffee, her fingers typing rapidly. She looked worse than yesterday. Her exhaustion was no longer just visible, it was alarming. Ethan had spent years making financial projections, predicting market trends, and ensuring profitability for his company. But he had never once predicted the damage being done to the people who made Caldwell Enterprises function. It was time for a shift, a fundamental, unavoidable shift. That afternoon, a corporate event was scheduled on the top floor of the executive lounge. Ethan knew it was where top management would gather, celebrating their latest quarterly achievements while ignoring the backbone of the company, the employees who actually made success possible. He saw his opportunity. After his shift, instead of heading to the janitor's break room, Ethan made his way up to the executive floor, blending into the background as he carried a mop and a bucket. The moment he stepped in, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Executives were toasting to another profitable quarter. Linda stood at the center, basking in the admiration of her peers. "We pushed our teams hard, but in the end, the numbers speak for themselves." Ethan clenched his fists. Pushed hard. They were driving people into the ground, and yet these were the people getting rewarded. A sudden hush fell over the room as the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises entered. But this time, Ethan wasn't invisible. He stepped forward, removing his janitor's cap, and the stunned silence that followed was deafening. The laughter stopped. The glasses stilled. Linda's face went pale. Ethan Caldwell was no longer just watching. He was about to change everything. The silence in the executive lounge was deafening. Ethan stood at the entrance, the janitor's cap now clenched in his fist, his presence cutting through the lavish atmosphere like a blade. Every executive in the room, from department heads to senior managers, looked at him as if they had seen a ghost. Linda Thompson was the first to recover. She plastered a fake smile on her face, stepping forward. "Mr. Caldwell, we weren't expecting you. No, you weren't." Ethan's voice was calm, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on each executive who had spent the past week laughing, dismissing, and belittling the very employees who kept this company afloat. The weight of the moment settled on everyone. The janitor they had ignored, the man they had looked past as if he were invisible, was now standing before them. Not as a worker, but as their boss. Ethan took a slow step forward. "I've spent the past week as one of our lowest paid employees, cleaning floors, emptying trash cans, watching the people in this company break their backs while those in this room pretend they don't exist." A few executives shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. I watched Angela, one of our most dedicated accountants, work herself to exhaustion because she was told that proving her worth meant sacrificing her health. Linda flinched. I saw Henry, one of our most talented IT specialists, get dismissed by management while taking the blame for their failures. Henry, who had suffered in silence, had finally been seen. Ethan's voice sharpened. "And I heard executives, some of you in this very room, mock the people who work under them, joking about their exhaustion, their struggles, their lack of recognition." He let the words sink in, his piercing gaze making sure no one could look away. "This ends today." The executives remained frozen. They had underestimated him. Ethan turned his attention to Linda. "Let's start with you, Linda. You've spent years abusing your position, taking credit for work that isn't yours, pushing employees past their limits, then discarding them like they're disposable." Linda opened her mouth, but Ethan cut her off. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." A gasp rippled through the room. Linda's face drained of color, her confidence crumbling in real time. "Mr. Caldwell, you can't be serious." "I am." His tone left no room for argument. "Take your things and leave." Two security officers stepped forward. Linda hesitated, looking around for support, but no one dared to speak. She turned on her heel and stormed out. Ethan exhaled, his attention shifting to the rest of the executives. "As for the rest of you, let me make something clear. This company does not function because of you. It functions because of the people you've ignored, mistreated, and underappreciated." He let his words settle before continuing. "Things are changing. Effective immediately, we're restructuring leadership. Promotions will be based on merit, not favoritism. Workloads will be reassessed. And above all, we will recognize the people who truly make this company run." The room remained tense, but something shifted. This wasn't just a speech. This was a reckoning. Ethan nodded, satisfied. "If you can't accept that, you're free to leave." No one moved. Good. As he walked out, Ethan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. This was only the beginning, but for the first time, Caldwell Enterprises was headed in the right direction. The fallout from Ethan's explosive confrontation in the executive lounge was immediate. News of Linda Thompson's abrupt firing spread like wildfire throughout the company. Employees whispered in break rooms, exchanged stunned glances in hallways, and sent cautious emails, trying to piece together what had just happened. For the first time in years, change was coming to Caldwell Enterprises. Ethan wasted no time. The next morning, he called for an all-hands meeting. Every employee, from senior executives to janitors, was required to attend. No one was exempt. The auditorium buzzed with uncertainty as people filed in. Ethan stood at the podium, scanning the room. He no longer saw employees. He saw people. People who had been overworked, overlooked, and undervalued. Today that changed. When the murmuring died down, he began. "For the past week, I've worked in this company as a janitor. I have seen things I never imagined possible. I have seen the true backbone of Caldwell Enterprises, the people who make it run, being ignored, mistreated, and cast aside while executives celebrate numbers on a spreadsheet. That ends now." A hushed silence settled over the crowd. People leaned forward, some wide-eyed, others nodding in agreement. Ethan continued. "Effective immediately, we are restructuring. Leadership positions will be reassessed. If you are in a position of power because of connections rather than competence, consider this your warning. Promotions will be earned through hard work, not favoritism. Pay will be reviewed to reflect the value employees bring to this company, not just the title they hold." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was unheard of. Angela, sitting in the front row, covered her mouth with her hand, disbelief and hope flickering in her eyes. Henry, standing at the back, crossed his arms, a slow smile spreading across his face. Ethan took a deep breath before delivering his final statement. "This is not just about policy changes. It's about culture. It's about respect. Caldwell Enterprises will no longer be a company that thrives on burnout and fear. It will be a place where hard work is valued, where every voice matters." Then he looked across the sea of employees and said the words that would redefine the company forever. "If you've ever felt unheard, if you've ever been passed over, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, I see you, and starting today, so will everyone else." The room erupted into applause. Change didn't happen overnight, but the transformation began that very day. Ethan personally met with department heads, ensuring that workload distribution was restructured to prevent burnout. He initiated a company-wide review of employee salaries, making sure that those who had been underpaid for years were compensated fairly. Angela received the promotion she had long deserved, not because she worked herself into the ground, but because she had proven her worth through skill and dedication. Henry was given a leadership role in IT, tasked with modernizing the company's infrastructure to prevent the system failures that had long plagued operations. More importantly, Ethan didn't just make changes from his office. He walked the floors, spoke with employees, and listened, not just to managers, but to every worker at every level. For the first time, Caldwell Enterprises felt like a company where people mattered. It wasn't easy. Some executives resisted, some left, but those who remained adapted or were replaced. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. But as he stood in his office later that evening, Looking out over the New York skyline, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not in his company's profits, but in its people. Caldwell Enterprises wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about making a difference. And that, Ethan knew, would be his greatest legacy. Despite the monumental changes Ethan had set in motion, the real challenge was just beginning. Change, especially in a company as large as Caldwell Enterprises, was never easy. Resistance still lingered, particularly among the upper management who had benefited from the old system. Some executives grumbled about disrupting the hierarchy, while others quietly tried to sabotage his reforms, hoping that things would eventually return to the way they were. Ethan was determined not to let that happen. One morning, while reviewing a stack of department reports, Angela knocked on his office door. She no longer looked exhausted, no longer hunched under the weight of endless work. Instead, she carried herself with confidence as a newly promoted senior financial analyst. "Ethan, we have a problem," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "Some of the department heads are deliberately ignoring the new salary adjustment policies. They're stalling the pay increases, claiming budget restrictions that don't exist." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who's responsible?" Angela hesitated. "Mostly Mark Duvall, the senior VP of finance. He's pushing back hard against the changes. He says that rewarding employees with raises instead of bonuses tied to profit margins is bad for business. He's also been meeting privately with other executives who are against the restructuring." Ethan exhaled slowly, suppressing his frustration. He should have known there would be pushback. "Set up a meeting with Mark and the entire executive board," Ethan said firmly. "I want everyone in the same room. This ends now." Angela nodded and left. This wasn't just about changing policies anymore. It was about proving that the new way of doing things wasn't just possible. It was necessary. By the time the executive board gathered later that afternoon, the tension was palpable. Mark Duvall sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The rest of the executives, some nervous, others openly resistant, waited for Ethan to speak. Ethan stood, his voice steady but firm. "I've heard the concerns. Some of you believe that increasing wages and changing the way we evaluate promotions will hurt our bottom line, that recognizing employees based on merit rather than favoritism is a risk. But let me ask you this. How much has our old system really benefited this company?" No one responded. He continued. "For years, we've bled talent. Employees who were passionate about their jobs left because they saw no future here. We ignored innovation from within and looked for outside hires instead of fostering the people who already knew our company best. Tell me, what good is a company that makes money if its foundation is crumbling?" Mark scoffed. "Ethan, we're running a business, not a charity. These so-called adjustments are just going to increase costs and lower our profit margins." Ethan's gaze locked onto him. "We are running a business, and businesses fail when they don't adapt. The old way was built on exploitation, burnout, and fear, and I won't allow it to continue. If you believe that treating employees fairly is a threat to our success, then you're the problem." Mark's face darkened. "And what if we don't agree with your vision?" Ethan leaned forward. "Then you're free to leave. But let me be clear. This company will move forward with or without you." Silence. Some executives glanced at one another, hesitant. But others, those who had long been waiting for someone to break the cycle, sat up straighter. Mark stood abruptly. "Then I guess I have no place here." He gathered his things and walked out. A few others followed, but most remained. Ethan let out a breath. This was what transformation looked like. Messy, uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. And as he looked around the room, seeing the executives who were still present, the ones who were ready to move forward, he knew he had done the right thing. Caldwell Enterprises was no longer the company it had once been. It was finally becoming what it was meant to be. The departure of Mark Duvall and his allies sent shockwaves through the company. Employees whispered in hallways, uncertain of what this meant for Caldwell Enterprises. Some feared retaliation, while others, those who had suffered under the old regime, felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Hope. Ethan knew that the most difficult phase was yet to come. Removing the corrupt was one thing, Rebuilding a company's culture from the ground up was another. A week after the executive purge, Ethan called another all-hands meeting. This time, the energy in the room was different. There was no nervous shuffling or hushed murmurs of doubt. Employees sat upright, eager, waiting. They weren't just expecting another speech. They were waiting for a leader to guide them into this new era. Ethan stepped up to the podium, scanning the faces before him. He no longer saw people bound by fear. He saw a team, ready to fight for something better. Caldwell Enterprises has always been defined by numbers: quarterly earnings, profit margins, market shares. But starting today, we will be defined by something more: our people. A murmur rippled through the crowd. For too long, this company has rewarded connections over competence, silence over innovation, and exhaustion over excellence. That ends now. We're building something new, a company where talent is recognized, where hard work is valued, and where leadership doesn't come from an office title. It comes from the impact we make every day. The silence stretched for a moment, then a slow clap started from the back. Angela, then Henry. Then, like a domino effect, the entire room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite, it was real. It was belief. Ethan didn't just stop at words. He took action. He initiated a company-wide audit to ensure fair salary adjustments, with Angela overseeing financial restructuring to guarantee transparency. Henry was placed in charge of revamping the IT department, ensuring that employee concerns were addressed with real solutions, not excuses. He personally met with employees from every department, not just executives. He sat in on team meetings, listened to concerns, and worked alongside his staff to understand their day-to-day struggles. He implemented a new promotion system, one that eliminated bias and rewarded innovation and performance. Employees now had clear career paths, mentorship programs, and leadership training opportunities. And most importantly, he ensured that no one would ever feel invisible again. Caldwell Enterprises was no longer just a company, it was a community. By the end of the month, the difference was undeniable. Employees who had once dreaded coming to work now walked through the doors with renewed energy. Departments that had struggled under toxic leadership now thrived under collaborative, supportive management. Ethan stood in his office one evening, looking down at the New York skyline. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. This was what leadership meant: not just making profits, making a difference. And for the first time in his career, he knew he had done exactly that. Weeks passed, and Caldwell Enterprises was no longer the company it had been. The toxic leadership was gone. The employees who had once felt voiceless were now empowered. But Ethan knew that one speech and a few policy changes weren't enough. Real change had to be sustained. He spent his days walking the floors, talking to employees, and listening. The fear that once lingered in the hallways had disappeared. Instead, there was energy, excitement. Employees were openly sharing ideas, collaborating across departments in ways that had never happened before. One morning, Angela walked into Ethan's office, a stack of reports in her hands. She no longer looked exhausted. She looked driven. "Ethan, I ran the latest financial models. Since implementing the new structure, we've seen a 15% increase in productivity, a 20% drop in turnover, and employee engagement is at an all-time high." Ethan smiled. "That's incredible, Angela." She hesitated. "There's more. We've received an influx of applications from highly skilled professionals who had previously turned us down. Word is spreading that Caldwell Enterprises isn't just another corporation. It's a place where people want to work." Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was the proof he had been waiting for. Not just numbers, but impact. People were beginning to believe in the company's transformation. But not everyone embraced the change so easily. At the next executive leadership meeting, a few remaining senior managers voiced concerns. "Ethan, this all sounds great, but how do we know this isn't just temporary? If we're too focused on employees, won't it hurt our bottom line in the long run?" Ethan let them finish before speaking. "Take a look at these numbers. Increased productivity, decreased turnover, higher job satisfaction. These are the things that create long-term success. Companies that treat their employees like assets rather than expenses thrive. Those that don't, they fail. Some executives nodded in understanding. Others still looked skeptical. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. If any of you still believe that a company is only as strong as its balance sheet, you're in the wrong place. Caldwell Enterprises will succeed, not in spite of our people, but because of them. A long pause. Then one by one, the executives nodded. The resistance was gone. The new Caldwell Enterprises was here to stay. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Certainty. He had built this company from the ground up, and now he was rebuilding it for the future. For the employees who made it thrive. For the people who deserve better. For the company it was always meant to be. A year had passed since Ethan Caldwell's bold decision to dismantle the toxic culture at Caldwell Enterprises. The company was unrecognizable from what it had been. What was once an environment fueled by fear and exhaustion had transformed into a workplace where innovation thrived, leadership was accountable, and employees felt valued. Ethan stood in the lobby one morning, watching as employees walked through the doors, not with the sluggish dread he had once seen, but with energy and purpose. There were no hushed complaints about overwork, no whispered fears of retaliation. Instead, laughter and casual conversations filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere he had once ignored. Angela approached him with a warm smile. She was no longer the overworked accountant buried under impossible deadlines. She was now a senior financial director, leading a team that respected her. Ethan, the final report is in. Employee satisfaction is the highest it's ever been. Our turnover rate has dropped to the lowest in company history, and we've been ranked one of the top workplaces in the industry. Ethan smiled, taking the report from her hands. And the bottom line? Angela smirked. Higher than ever. Turns out, investing in people pays off. Ethan chuckled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He had fought for this, and he had won. That afternoon, Caldwell Enterprises held its first employee appreciation ceremony, a tradition that Ethan had introduced to recognize the unsung heroes of the company. Employees from every level of the organization gathered in the main conference hall, a space that had once only been used for executive meetings. Ethan took the stage, scanning the room filled with familiar faces. Henry stood in the crowd, now the head of IT, thriving in the leadership role he had once been denied. Employees who had once struggled in silence now stood tall, proud to be part of something greater than a paycheck. Ethan cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying his voice across the hall. 1 year ago, I went undercover in this very company. I saw the struggles, the unfairness, and the reality that many of you faced every single day. And I made a promise to change this company not just for the sake of profits, but for the people who make it what it is. A wave of applause filled the room, but Ethan wasn't finished. Today, Caldwell Enterprises is no longer just about numbers. It's about people, about recognizing the talent, hard work, and dedication of every individual here. You are the heart of this company, and you always will be. As the employees rose to their feet, cheering not just for him, but for each other, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was no longer just his company. It belonged to everyone in that room. Caldwell Enterprises had finally become the place he had always dreamed it could be. Not just successful, but truly great.